operates. This is what diversity looks like in a post-2000 era. So, and I think this is important to mention because the diversity, and this is how I started getting into the Sister Vegan Project and really shifting my work, diversity in the white mainstream vegan movement means that people of color join with the goal to uphold the logics of becoming vegan around, animals first, animal rights first, a post-human approach, where we're so past racial identity politics, we're only focusing on, we're all animals, we're all, humans are animals, and we all should be looking at, I guess, liberating non-human animals, okay? So diversity in the vegan mainstream movement, even now, 7 years later, really means that people of color have to jump on the vegan bandwagon for the reasons that we have displayed, okay? And then what I was doing with my work was coming in and saying, well, actually, I found this thing called Afrocentric veganism, and most of the black women are actually entering it not for animal rights, but they're entering it in a way that questions whiteness, how whiteness has affected their bodies, and they're coming from a race-conscious and decolonial approach. So for them, that is priority. And I was interested as a social scientist, why? How is this happening? But interestingly, it didn't matter that even if I was positioning it as, my interest as a social scientist, I still received a lot of animosity and hostility from white identified vegans who even claim that they're not racist, but race and gender in their minds had nothing to do with the centrality of veganism. So despite that, I wrote the thesis, and which I graduated in 2007, and I ended up getting the Dean's Award, not to toot my own horn, but to say that Harvard is not going to give me this coveted award if I'm just playing the race card and I'm just like being anti-white. That I used, particular methods and methodologies, and thankfully I was able to use Black feminist theory to actually explain the problems of whiteness and the problems of superficial diversity rhetoric in veganism, but how that in itself represents just the overall problems of what it means to create a diversity still based on, Eurocentric white male logic system, whether it's veganism or something else. So that was what I did. I graduated, and I decided I wanted to continue this work more because it just seemed like the more I did this, the more angry and hostile comments I would receive. And I decided that I'm going to start looking into PhD programs to really see, what I can do and how I can explain this more as a system and learn a language that I can speak to the mainstream about, in which I don't come across as I'm promoting anti-whiteness, anti-white against anti-white people, but what I'm looking at is promoting how to look at systemic racism, systemic whiteness. So I have a few experiences when I went to Rutgers to try to look at their PhD programs. I was given a ride by one of the older white male professors to get me to another point, and I was telling him about my experiences and what I was interested in. So it was kind of another experience with, diversity, where like we would want you here if you go, the route of not questioning how whiteness and racism are actually a problem when it comes to Black health disparities. So I had spoken to him about how Afrocentric vegans, Black women vegans who are into Afrocentrism, they're against cow dairy, or against eating anything that is, dairy from a cow, and that they link it to being part of a system of whiteness that has greatly affected their health. And his response was, he shook his head, he kind of laughed it off, like, what does milk have to do with whiteness or race? So, it wasn't like he was interested in asking more questions, but the mere fact that I had spoken to him about that, it was obvious I had made his world uncomfortable. And I had brought in this concept of Afrocentrism, which, in all honesty, does scare a lot of those largely white who feel that Eurocentrism is the only starting point for research and real rigorous scholarship. So what I found interesting in that moment was that the professor never really asked or wanted to ask more, because I had made it uncomfortable for him. Instead of, and at that time, let me explain to you, at that time, a lot of the journal articles I saw about black health disparities, it really pointed to blacks being, they're helpless, they're hopeless, they can't help themselves. And a lot of the public health work and resources going toward helping people of color, it was going toward those in white leadership positions, kind of going in, doing missionary type of work, colonialist ways of trying to help people of color. So what I was offering as a potential student was to actually question that particular starting point in ending health disparities, and then also offering what, this Afrocentric approach, whether I believe in it or not, and how that started to actually look at whiteness, the center of whiteness, as a problem. And I had a lot of occurrences of that when I was looking for public health programs, PhD programs. Largely white faculty had this weird response to what I wanted to do. And I did eventually find a place at UC Davis. It wasn't perfect, but I eventually found my place there. And I graduated in the early part of this year. And I have to say that I thought getting a PhD in this and getting awards and fellowships, I thought then it would make me an expert, and I would no longer receive the hostility and the angry comments that I had gotten 10 years ago when I was first interested in this. But I actually receive more. Now that I have published more, I have a larger public presence online, I still receive the same anger from largely white populations when I'm talking about a system, and the comments reflect that they think I'm talking individually about them. And I think that seems to be one of the biggest problems that I've been trying to remedy by creating a more critical race literacy for a post-2000 age. Like, I'm trying to figure out how that works into first understanding the problems of diversity. What happens when you start bringing in curriculum that talks about whiteness, and when you get a lot of the responses from largely white identified people who think you're attacking them as a white person versus a system. And I'm kind of, confused about this. But thankfully, in the past 5 years, I've also realized that, if you're like me, you're doing this type of work and you have to deal with racist microaggressions and all this trauma, that we also need to be mindful of the fact that the system is not going to help us be healthy through it. And granted, I'm now doing more Afrocentric veganism, but you don't have to do that. It's just how do you handle the end of the day where you're dealing with someone at school who's asking you, are you here because you're filling quotas, and you get home and you eat lots of caffeinated products and you can't sleep. And I've learned to look at herbal healing systems and look at indigenous healing systems as ways to try to help me get through that work as a social justice worker, as a scholar, but also the self-care. And that self-care in itself is not actually being egotistical or just focusing on something that is narcissistic, but that you actually have to learn how to take care of yourself. Because we're kind of living in this society, at least for a lot of black women, the strong black woman syndrome, where black women are expected to just go through it all, that we're really strong and tough, and we can't show that we've been hurt physically or emotionally. So for me, taking on nutritional activism has been really, really important in my own social justice work and my scholarship, and understanding how diversity rhetoric and initiatives have actually hurt me or if they've healed me. So I want to kind of shift, let me see, because I want to leave a half hour for questions, great. I want to kind of shift more to the food aspect of my work and the decolonial politics, the part of the title that this talk is about. So what is decolonial? What does it mean to decolonize, right? So I know there are many varying definitions of what that means, but my focus is predominantly on food and nutrition. So regardless of race, most of us who are born or raised in this country, our minds have been colonized by capitalism, biofarms, industrialized food system. And the way we begin to think about how to eat has been, dominated by that. So for instance, I didn't realize probably my fibroid tumor problems came from my ignorance around nutrition. And that if you eat a certain way and it imbalances your hormones, you're going to have a propensity for getting certain ailments, okay? And then the way our system is established in terms of healing, when you go to an allopathic doctor, most of them are only trained in 3 to 4 hours of nutrition. So they never really actually ask you what you've been doing, what you've been eating, and how that connects to your overall body health. And that's, of course, in part because most of the doctors are trained by the biopharmaceutical companies. It's very profitable to just give over a pill, right? And you actually let go of your agency. So basically you're seeking these experts to give you pills, a Band-Aid, instead of actually figuring out alternative ways to empower yourself and your community. So most of us, regardless of racial or ethnic identity, most of us don't trust ourselves to actually start healing ourselves and trust not to necessarily always just go to the biopharmaceutical companies. And with my work, and kind of integrating Afrocentric veganism and decolonial food politics, what does it mean for me to take care of myself, be an anti-racist activist, and not grab for the Dunkin' Donuts, the milkshakes that used to make me sick? What can I grab for when I have ailments that have been induced by these stresses? So, looking back into those indigenous systems, and for me it was Afrocentric veganism. And for a lot of my other friends, I have a friend who's doing indigenous healing systems, and she's Chicana, and really looking at those systems and teaching her community that our foodways, everything that we have now has been colonized, and that's why we have high instances of diabetes, and we have high instances of hypertension, and it's hard for us to be activists in our own communities and try to go against the system, but at the same time we're really sick, and we don't even know that these foods are killing us. So there's a lot of focus on the work that I do and her work and others. How can we engage in anti-racism and also acknowledge that systemic racism makes it hard for so many of our communities to have access to these foods that we need for healing. So like food deserts, even gentrification. We're talking about gentrification, where you've been in this neighborhood for a generation or two, and then more upper class people move in, and these more expensive healthy stores come in, but you can't afford them. So how do we actually integrate all of this into our self-care and decolonizing our body? And I started thinking about, in terms of diversity, is it diversity, is that what we need to make things much better? Or do we need to start focusing on structural change? And what does structural change look like in an era in which to kind of question the mainstream can kind of get you in trouble? So I thought 20 years ago, when I was doing this and annoying my peers and my professors, it's 20 years later and I kind of still see that shift of going toward like what that original call for papers had mentioned, this racial battle fatigue, or even if you're not doing racial justice, just being kind of punished for doing this particular type of work. So I was wondering, for starting the Q&A sessions, what do you think about these narratives that I've shared with you? Have you experienced anything similar in terms of food and self-care? Do you get the self-care that you need if you're someone who's kind of doing this social justice work, or if you are in fact a person of color who is thinking about these things? What are your stories? What are your questions? Is there anyone there just like trying to help you with the fact that you are experiencing these racial traumas, but you don't really have the counseling help that you need? Maybe your university or institution may not quite have those pieces in place, or even with like the food and nutritional healing aspect. Yes?
Hi. I'm a queer person of color here at Oxy, and interested in decoloniality, decolonization of academia and similar issues. And I recently have been feeling very punished for my sort of social justice sort of activism on campus, but I also experienced that a lot from faculty and students of color as well, particularly faculty administration who were trained to best operate on campus as a white male, I would define it as. So I was interested in what your insight on that was in terms of navigating sort of horizontal racism.
Can you say the last part?
I was interested in your insight on how you would navigate that sort of system where there's horizontal racism as well as sort of more traditional white supremacy.
Yeah, so can you tell me, with as comfortable as you want, can you give me an example, like an actual example of something that you've encountered, or?
Well, just the other day, I was sort of very much talked down to by an administrator of color for sort of trying to do sort of a racially charged sort of demonstration. So I was, the pain was different because it was coming from another person of color, not of my race, but still, I had to address that differently than I would, in my head, than it would have, differently than if it was a white person.
So the person responded to you not supporting what you were doing, and were they basically implying that you were pointing out something that was racist, but it wasn't? I'm just trying to understand so I can better answer your question.
Well, my criticisms of the school and the administration in terms of how they handle diversity were being met with, so I was basically talked to like a child, like being punished for something silly, you know.
So
it was an invalidation. I just don't want to be, I'm not comfortable talking about specifically what it was,
okay.
So that's why I'm sort of being vague, but I just was wondering how you think about self-care in that context.
Oh, okay. Well, I know each person is different and unique with how they can find the best, method of self-care. So I don't know much about this area or what's available, but I know, like for me, just finding a community. I don't know, like if you have a community of people to come together with and talk about who are like-minded, and like you can feel that support. I don't know if you have any spiritual communities. I know for me, at least in the Bay Area, it's helpful to have the East Bay Meditation Center, which is kind of a Buddhist sangha that incorporates, mindfulness and then healing of racial and sexual abuse, and not thinking we're all post-racial or post-feminist or what. And in terms of self-care, like I don't know what you experience physically, but I know for me I have to remind myself, if you have access, to these healthy foods and herbs, like I don't know if you feel insomnia from this, but making sure you eat in a way or drink in a way that helps you sleep at night. Because sleep is really important. I just don't know what sources are available here, but do you have other services here where you can go and talk in confidence with somebody, confidentiality with somebody about what you're experiencing without feeling like you're endangering your safety? Does that exist at Occidental?
I would say no.
Yeah.
My last counseling appointment was me explaining to my counselor why her microaggressions were making me uncomfortable. So that would sort of has been my personal experience with that.
Yeah, I don't want to make up any answers. I just don't know. But like, what's frustrating is that I'm hearing something that could have easily happened 20 years ago. Like it's happening 20 years later. I don't know. I'm just trying to think now that I know more than I did when I was 19, that I would try in some way at least start organizing and trying to get those resources. Like oh, it's obvious that I'm not the only one. If you can find maybe 10 or 12 other friends who have had similar experiences, and maybe go to your administration and say, you know, we need this counseling help that actually acknowledges this, and people who are trained in understanding, you know, anti-racism or, you know, not being heterosexist. I don't know if it's a bit just like kind of, if you can find that support. I know it's hard though. And it's hard just kind of navigating as a student in that weird power dynamic. Where you do, like I was thinking of the same thing, you have to be, kind of have to be careful what you do. And, you know, your own safety too. So, but if you're asking for like just food and nutrition, there's particular teas and nutrients that you can incorporate into your diet to help with those physical stresses. So like at night, lemon balm tea, skull cap, as opposed to like sleeping pills, and it's cheaper anyway. Making sure, I know it's hard, to take caffeine out of your diet as much as possible if you're having problems with just calming down. Meditation doesn't have to be associated with any spiritual or religious practice, but just sitting for 20, 30 minutes a day and just breathing deeply into your belly. Like I found that it seems really superficial if you've never done it before, but it's been really helpful with dealing with the anger. And learning how to breathe right, because when most of us are stressed out or traumatized, we breathe shallow, and it really does affect your brain health. You need to breathe as deep as possible, get the oxygen that you need. So I found that very helpful, and even better to find maybe a community or a small group of people to sit with and do that with, I found. I know it seems kind of small, but you know, it did help with little things where, you know, I was kind of shocked at things years later that I saw kind of manifest as physical ailments when I look back, because I knew I wasn't taking care of myself that way. So that's what I would suggest, or try figuring those out through those suggestions.
See, there's a question right there.
Yeah.
I think your story of being a student of color at Dartmouth is an experience that many students of color on campus probably feel here. And, you know, while there's a group of students that are engaged and interested in challenging the microaggressions that we experience and the sort of racism that we do see on campus, there still seems to be a conversation about what you were saying before about challenging systemic racism without attacking individual people. Like, for instance, I was at a BSA meeting yesterday, and it turned into a back and forth conversation about, you know, if a woman grabs her, you know, purse while she passes you down the street and sees you as threatening, you know, is it too confrontational to say, why did you do that, or just ignore it because it's part of a bigger system? I'm wondering, how do you, like, balance in your work challenging something systemic while also holding people accountable for their own racism?
Yeah, I've actually become more comfortable, and I think everyone is on their, I guess, timeline for their own timeline for how long it takes to get to that point. And I'm still not very comfortable. Like, I'm just nervous talking about it, and I think that says a lot. Like, I had a whole speech prepared, and I was telling him sometimes I don't know if I should just talk from the speech I prepared, read from notes, you know, kind of improv, because I'm worried that I'm not worried for the students of color, I'm worried that I've offended white students, you know, and forgetting to breathe deeply, like all these things that are happening. But in the past year, I've become more confident, at least for me it helped just like getting that PhD. Not saying you have to get a PhD, because I know many people, including my mom, who has a GED, should just like call your SAT out right now. Like, if you've done something racist, she'll just call it out, right? You don't need that. But it helped me have the PhD, and then it helped me just kind of understand the language of racism as a system, and then kind of translate it in a way that is more mindful but assertive. So I've been able to do that on blogs, I've been able to do that when I've gone to talks, and my research and my scholarship has been attacked. And instead of kind of being like, no, I'll just like say it and say like, you know, I came here not to create any type of white blame, but in honesty, like, we're in a society today in which I'm pretty sure you don't believe what you just said, and that you are kind of distracting yourself away from what you know is really true. And there's a reason why there's, hundreds of books and articles written, and you can easily go online and Google it to start. So I'm not gonna, reiterate what has already been done. So I just give people a few citations, and I say, if you're really serious about this, then here, go look at that, and then we can come back and talk. That's just me. I know you can't do that probably with someone walking down the street and grabs their purse, but this is more or less when I'm on campus, or I'm in, a scenario like this, where someone claims that they're not racist, but at the same time they'll say something that's obvious that to some degree systemic anti-black racism has shaped their consciousness. And I just, I say that, and I say that it's okay. I'm not attacking you as a white person, and I'll even use, my own experiences. I'm not someone who's transgender identified. I will never know what that's like. But I say a lot of stupid crap that is transphobic, I'm sure. And though I've been reading a lot in the past 2 years about transgender studies, I'm still, whether I'm an overt transphobe or not, I still benefit from a system of cisgender privilege, right? Or people who were born with, I'm born with vagina, I identify as a woman. I benefit from that. So I try to use those stories saying, I don't feel attacked when someone says to me, it seems like you're producing covert transphobia, or I don't, same with ableism. I'm an able-bodied person, but still I benefit from a system of ableism. So I think sharing those stories as well and telling people that, and then shifting also, just because, you're not an overt white racist, doesn't mean you're not benefiting from a system of whiteness, or that your consciousness was not somehow greatly influenced by white racial formation. So I don't know if that helps, but it helps when I bring it in and I'm not just focusing as if I'm perfect and I don't, perpetuate systemic oppressions. So that helps when I'm in those particular things. But like if you're walking down the street, like my brother has that all the time.
That was just an example.
Yeah, but like my brother has that all the time. He's like, someone crossed the street again, but I was wearing a tie, and I was just like, I don't know how to answer that. That's like very different. I'm still trying to figure out those more, when I'm not in a workspace and I'm not in school, but you're just out and about in public. Like, what do I do? Do I make little business cards that have links? Which I used to do when I was to be sexually harassed. I'd give it to men and say, this is sexual harassment. This is what it is. And maybe you don't realize it's what you're doing. So go to this website and maybe you'll learn. So that's actually good. Yes?
One comment I wanted to just, I'll just turn this way, I wanted to throw out there is that for any of you, when you're dealing with people's prejudices and they just take it for granted that they can treat you a certain way based on whatever prejudicial standards that they have in mind, or actually don't even have in mind, they're just kind of going on autopilot because they just internalize it, right?
Yeah.
One way that I think, at least from my experience, that one way you can learn to be more assertive is that you need to ask yourself, you know that part of the reason that you don't want to bring it up to that person is because they might feel embarrassed, they might feel sad, they might feel offended, etc., all those negative feelings, which none of us want to feel those feelings. Nobody wants to be admitted, be accused of or properly accused of fitting these sorts of negative patterns. But then the question you have to ask yourself is, why have you taken on the responsibility to keep this person secret for them?
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Right. So every time you're running into someone who says something racist or sexist or homophobic, transphobic, etc., and you know that they're wrong, and probably after they say it, they know they said something wrong, but you're the one who decides, well, you're going to hold that secret for them. That adds some more stress. And so you're still thinking months later, oh, I should have said this to that person, I should have said this to that other person, and they're walking around, they've forgotten. They don't have the baggage. You took it up for them. Why not give them back their baggage? It's their stuff. Give it back to them. Why do you have to carry it? And I used to do that all the time, by the way. So, I mean, you guys see one presentation of me as a professor, but oftentimes the stuff I'm bringing up around these issues is stuff I had to go through. Because sooner or later I sort of realized I was getting so stressed and so frustrated on behalf of a person who could care less. They were nonchalant. Why do I have to have that responsibility? It's theirs. So just at least think about that. Is it really your responsibility to keep someone secret that that they're anti-Semitic, or that they're anti-black, or that they hate women, or why is that your responsibility? Did God put you on earth to do that? If so, hard life in front of you. But if not, your life will be a lot easier if you can turn that back around and say, it's your responsibility to deal with this. And I'm going to let you know because we're cool.
That's directly connected to my question about Black mammyism. In the past, I've done a lot of interracial sort of cross-coalition work between women of color and white women. And one of the things that I've learned to say is that, you know, I don't provide a sort of chocolate teat for you to get some comfort, right? Like, this work is going to be really hard, and there's going to be things that you're going to have to deal with. I'm not here to necessarily reassure you that you're a great person or all that type of stuff. But could you just kind of talk about your term, like, Black mammyism and that sort of emotional labor, and how do we start to, like, disinvest from that role? And none of the white women have said, I want you to provide me comfort. But then there becomes a moment or a number of moments where you get the longing look of like, oh, but like, reassure me. So could you talk a little bit about that? Because I think on campus a lot of people are trying to figure out, like, I mean, do you walk on the broken glass again to try and, you know, create an alliance, or do you just do your own thing? And, you know, could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, okay. So, and this, you know, I don't know how many people are familiar with Black mammyism, but it's just basically what I had spoken about before, where I want to make sure that I am more sympathetic and caring of the feelings of the white racial status quo than my own feelings and what it means, you know, what he was basically saying, you know, kind of holding their baggage. And I basically have had engaged in the behavior of Black mammyism probably up until 3 years ago. And it's not like it was always the same, so, you know, from an early age up until 3 years ago, I was slowly kind of letting go of it, but I was also very confused about it. And then I think just at one point I just got sick of it. I just kind of got to my limit of emotional and physical stress. And I remember it was like my second pregnancy too, and I'm like, I have to stop doing this. You know, every time I'm stressed out, I think it probably impacts the baby's health as well. So I realized also through, this is just me, my Zen Buddhist training, I'm never going to be the perfect Zen Buddhist, but what mindfulness really means and what honesty really means. And if I'm going to be mindful and honest about systemic oppression, then I have to understand that it means that I have to some degree, hurt or help to kill that particular ego of somebody who doesn't want to be mindful or who does not want to awake to how they're perpetuating suffering. So I had to realize that, you know, the unconditional love and mindfulness also means that you have to be willing to, quote unquote, hurt someone's feelings because you understand the greater good that it's going to produce, you know, if that makes sense. And then I also tell a lot of people, you know, transformation it's difficult. It's always difficult. And the mere fact that you're no longer in a comfortable space you used to be in, that you may cry or you feel guilty, and like that's actually progress. That actually is that's the right start to, you know, a better path. Mm-hmm. And for me, I just had to, like, my time just basically came when I finally really understood the tenets of Zen Buddhism, mindfulness, and what it means to create a world of less suffering. And that, you know, I was thinking the immediate, right? I'm going to make someone cry. God, I just made them suffer. When in fact, I wasn't looking at the broader, the more distant future and what that crying will mean, and, you know, all of these different stages, you know, denial and shame and guilt, and then realizing that they're on this path to becoming more mindful. But I also, you know, just had to learn to just let go, whether the person takes that seed that I plant, whether they want to water it or just let it dry. Like, I just had to realize that a lot of my happiness was connected to what I say to this person, they have to take it immediately. And that it is my responsibility, like taking responsibility. And like, why should I have that responsibility? Why do I feel responsible? And how is it that I can present these ideas to people in a way where it at least tries to push them more to realize that you have just as much agency, if not more responsibility, to make a change, and accept that it's going to be hard and difficult, but that doesn't necessarily mean like you're a bad person because you're becoming aware of having colluded with a system of suffering. So that's how I've been able to do it, and it's not always perfect, but over the past few years I just realized my mental and physical health are a lot better by doing that. And you know, for the most part, a lot of people come back to me or email me actually saying, you know, when you first proposed this to me, and I just said, you just hate me because I'm a white person, you're making me cry. Well, I want to let you know that, you know, I got a minor in critical theory looking at race, and like I totally get what you were saying, but I didn't get it 4 years ago, you know, and that's cool. I get a lot of those type of stories. So it wasn't an instant change, but maybe 4 or 5 years later, they're contacting me, they're letting me know about their transformation. And also letting me know that they know will never ever be 100% anti-racist. No one ever is, but that they're always on this path, and they're okay with making mistakes, and they're okay with learning, and they're okay with being quiet and listening to the other. Thanks. Yes?
Hi, I'm Brandy. Thank you so much for coming. This is really awesome. I'm just wondering if you can talk a little bit about your particular philosophy of veganism that you represent, and how that connects with the other social justice work that you're doing, and how it makes sense in that context.
So for me, I do not proselytize veganism for everybody, and that's just me, because I am not all 6.5 billion people. I know when I see an animal killed, I see that they're suffering, I know that they're suffering, I understand that animals have emotional lives. And for me, it's important for me not to perpetuate that suffering. I also did not come into veganism, as you heard, from the animal rights perspective. So I first came in as a black feminist trying to figure it all out, and then the Afrocentric veganism. And I have to explain that as much as Afrocentric veganism helped me cure my fibroid tumors, I still have a lot of issues with Afrocentrism because, though it may be race conscious, that I think they're very transphobic and heteronormative, and they kind of assume a healthy future black nation is heterosexual and heteronormative gender conforming. So I have problems with that. So my concept of like food and veganism basically comes from how can I not be one-dimensional in approach, which I think a lot of the mainstream veganism members are, which is just like looking at animals. Or with Afrocentric veganism, they're kind of just looking at health, but not necessarily the non-human animal component. So with my philosophy and how it's been integrated in my work, I've been trying to understand, for example, how can I help create a more mindful planet that alleviates suffering by understanding the collective history of black women in America, and also understanding how non-human animals suffer. So and how we the exploitation of both causes suffering of both. So for example, I don't want to compare, but I'm trying to explain it through, if you understand, matrices of oppression. So the best example I can give is black women, chattel slavery, being forced to breed black people as slaves, being forced to be a wet nurse for white slave masters' babies, giving birth to your baby only for your baby to be taken away and sold. And then looking a lot of how non-human animals, at least in America and in the industrialized factory farming, how they're treated, and how to almost, not the same, but to some degree, their reproductive systems are also exploited. So to get milk, you have to keep a cow pregnant all the time, and you have to constantly take away her babies. And similarly to how black female were perceived during antebellum slavery, it doesn't matter, you can take their babies away, they can't feel, they don't have emotional lives like white people, right? They're tough, you can take their babies away, they're subhuman anyway. I hear a lot of that with excusing the suffering that a cow goes through. When you take away their babies, how the cow's freaking out. Once the baby is born, they take the cow's baby away. And I started thinking about, okay, how can I integrate this into my work, what I'm looking at? And there's been so much written about this, How can I understand not just, what the cow's going through and what, how Black women's reproductive systems have been exploited? How can I bring that together and really create, a Black feminist, vegan framework? Does that make sense? I'm still working on it and stuff because it is a very delicate subject, especially with PETA, which is the benchmark for vegan ethics. How PETA has a very post-racial approach to veganism, and a lot of times they'll use Black slavery as a comparison to non-human animal suffering, but at the same time, PETA does not acknowledge that they are very, they frame ethics in a very post-racial white approach. So they'll use, back in the day, racism as parallel to how non-human animals are treated. But they use racism to their benefit in a way that, this is something that happened back in the day and now animals are, in effect,